All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Grow Rogue podcast. Today I'm joined by Gene Kim. Gene and I have already had some really great conversation about some of our favorite restaurants in the Atlanta area, and so depending on how this goes, he'll let me buy him lunch one of these days, or he may get done with this interview and think I don't want to hang out with that guy anymore. But either way, it's been really good to get to know you a little bit, and I'm excited to dig into this conversation. But before I get going, Gene, I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this podcast.
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Gene, so I got to know you a little bit, and I'm glad to have done so. But for those who do not know you, who maybe have never heard of you, they never met you before, how would you describe yourself? How would you introduce yourself and what you do? And I'm really big on this. What is the problem that you solve?
Yeah, so me and my two other co-founders, we actually have a small consulting outlet of sorts called Karisma. We are focused on helping you on the innovation and the growth front of your company. And it sounds somewhat nebulous, but what we typically do with a lot of the organizations or people that we work with, it's all about identifying and establishing, if you want to call it a framework for your business that allows you to kind of follow along and actually have a well documented and a well structured strategy, which is data driven, and that now serves as your guide, not only from the short term but also in terms of mid to long term. In terms of how you want to grow your company, what aspects of your company should you really look at. And we're helping everything from startups all the way to multi-billion-dollar conglomerates on a global scale.
This is where I get to pretend that I'm smart. I understand what you're saying, Gene, right? I understand what that means, practically speaking. But let's say you're having a first conversation with somebody. What is the challenge that they are describing in, super layman's terms, where you say, I understand what you're dealing with. Here's how we handle that. I'm always trying to figure out, what is that problem? What is that frustration that a client is having, so that we can say, hey, that is one that other people have, and here's how we solve that. So how do they actually describe that, over coffee, over dinner? What are the terms, and how are they using that? Or what terms are they using to describe that situation?
Yeah, so I mean, it starts everything from what I would call kind of some of the primary issues, as in, we're not getting the type of sales that we think we're supposed to be getting. I'm not sure if the product is the right fit for the market. Things of that nature, all the way to, hey, we really need a change in our corporate culture to be a lot more, forward thinking, innovative. So we kind of find ourselves in a lot of different levels of conversation. And the current keyword right now that I'm hearing a lot from organizations is that they're having a very hard time finding talent. And this goes at a lot of different issues that's current in today's market. And we're trying to say that, well, it's really how you define talent and what you're really looking for, and why do you need that particular talent in your particular organization. So it's a little more deeper in the conversation of understanding, and it's somewhat customized in that, every company and every organization is a little different. And we just need to kind of sit down, talk about where they're at, where they're trying to go, and what's really missing, from the standpoint that's hampering them to actually grow.
And so what then is like the biggest challenge when it comes to finding that talent? Is it because, maybe the market, right? Is it because those skills are actually genuinely really difficult to find? Is it usually more culture? I mean, that is a really curious, problem, I guess.
Yeah, it's really all of the above. But the way that we're trying to make sure that we categorize things is that, there are things that can be controlled and you can actually handle. And there are other aspects that it's no matter who you are, you're not going to be able to resolve it because there's such a gap that exists, whether it's a pay gap, whether it's a talent gap, whether it's the fact that, the geopolitical gap, and other, external factors that is beyond your control, right?
Mm.
So some of the things that we're trying to at least to talk to people about is that you need to have a different perspective or a different lens in terms of why you think that talent doesn't exist today. And you just need to kind of walk them through in terms of getting them to understand there are different ways and different strategies that one can implement to kind of find or maybe even grow the talent inwards, to allow them to actually not have that become an issue for them anymore.
No, that's good. Yeah, I mean, a couple things you say there that really stick out to me, and this is, I get to talk about one of my hobbies I didn't know would become a hobby is youth sports, right? I'm coaching all these my kids' stuff, and one of the things we do talk to them about is control the controllables, right? There are some things in your business that you can control, and you can control culture. You can control your the process by which you identify and engage and get involved, the right type of skills and all that kind of stuff. What you can't control, frankly, if you do all those things right, is how this person is actually going to respond to all of that. So that sounds like what you're describing is that, look, we're going to figure out the things we can do right, and we're going to make sure we're doing those things right. And then we're going to have to then leave some of it up to a little bit of, you kind of have to let go a little bit and let that individual, I do not like the phrase, sink or swim, but you do have to let them figure it out or, get ready to make another decision.
Yeah. So one of the nice things about the innovation framework that we actually establish with a lot of the clients that we deal with basically kind of provides a priority list, if you want to call it, in terms of saying, okay, you have a finite amount of money and time to actually do something about, let's say for the example, the talent issue. What do you need to do first, right? What, from a timeline perspective, from an impact perspective, if you're looking at it from short to mid to long term, what is the actual order in which you want to kind of go about some of those issues or challenges that you're facing, to know that, if I'm going to, spend the first amount of time and resources on something, I know exactly what that priority list actually looks like from a Pareto perspective. So that's where that framework, that strategy, that discussion with clients actually help. And that's, where we kind of find our sweet spot, if you want to call it, in terms of helping people out, especially when they're talking about these particular issues.
So, okay, so talk to me about frameworks in general first, right? So you and I do something similar. We do very different things, but we do something similar in that every client project, every client is a completely new and separate thing. But you have developed, as we have, a framework for figuring out exactly what needs to be done and then doing the things that need to be done to improve that. How does one go about creating that unique framework that can be applied in a lot of different situations to all get to a better outcome? Does that make sense? That question makes sense?
It's interesting that you use those particular wordings because we actually, the innovation framework that we usually kind of, find ourselves, rooting ourselves in with a lot of the clients and customers is something called the jobs to be done innovation framework.
Yes.
It comes out of Harvard. It's been popularized through several consulting outlets, that basically says that regardless of whether it's a technology or product, service, or a process, the reason that the market or the customer gravitates towards a particular product or solution is because it actually does a job better than other solutions that are out on the market, right? So this can be applied basically across everything. You can do it with products, you can do it with B2B, B2C, you can do it with corporate culture. And what we do is we actually do something called Jobs to be Done Plus, in that we understand that a lot of the companies or organizations already have somewhat of an established framework or strategy, and we try not to upheaval or override the current strategy that they have. What we try to do is we try to find the right amount or the appropriate amount of infusion of jobs to be done to make sure that that infused hybrid approach actually is much more beneficial for the organization. So we spend a lot of time making sure that we kind of, if you want to call it, pick and choose where we need to kind of imply jobs to be done into that framework that they already have, to kind of create a jobs to be done framework that actually makes their whole organization better, right? And in so doing, what happens is that we kind of find particular areas in where they have to have better jobs that need to be done, and it's based off of outcomes that are generated through what we believe are a list of things that happens throughout the journey, if you want to call it, of the market or the customer in which that particular organization or company is involved with. So we kind of establish that. We provide, if you want to call it, the importance and satisfaction of each of those outcomes. And by understanding the responses that you typically get from the market or customers based off of those outcomes through a jobs to be done approach, you kind of get a data-driven assessment in terms of what's important, what particular levels of outcomes are not so much satisfied, which gives you an opportunity to kind of look for new ideas possibly, or even ideas that you may already have existing that you just haven't had a good chance of actually marketing and using the appropriate wording for the particular marketing effort that you have.
Yeah, and I really like the jobs to be done framework because we tend to get ourselves stuck in. I don't want to undervalue strategy, right? That's incredibly valuable, but sometimes we do get stuck in the talking about things rather than the, let's talk about things with a purpose, right? Let's figure out the things we actually need to do, and then it becomes almost a project management challenge, right? Like, are we getting the things done that we need to get done in a timely enough manner to get to make the impact that we want? So that sounds like there's a strategic and then there's a very tactical thing. So in your organization, are you driving both of those, right? Like from the strategic and then the implementation of it, or do you guys have like an internal process for that? What does that look like?
Yeah, so a good point. And that's part of the reason why I kind of hesitated to say that we're a consulting outlet, because we
Right.
just don't throw, a PowerPoint slide at the end of the day and
Yep.
say that, all right, it's all yours and we're out, right? That's just not how we operate. So we try to make sure that we kind of stick around, if you want to call it, and make sure that we actually help out with the implementation and the execution of some of those findings, in so doing to make sure that they're actually following along the suggestions and the recommendations that we provided them, to actually realize that if you do it in the way that we kind of suggested, you will see changes, and there are certain nuances that we might be able to help you out from the project management or the execution of that particular aspect of findings that we've actually provided to them, right? One of the unique aspects that I especially try to implement when we actually submit proposals to people is that there's typically if you want to call it a training period. It could be a day, it could be 2 days, sometimes it could be a week, it could be across, 4 weekends over a month, whatever the case may be, right? I always in the proposal add in what I would call a follow-up, for lack of a better word, a mentoring session, online, in
Yep.
person, depending on where the client is actually located, anywhere between 10 weeks to, in certain cases, 3 to 6 months, depending on the project,
Yep.
right? And that's where the more details and the more, if you want to call it, on the ground issues are being discussed, talked about, trying to make sure that we're able to actually make the connections in such a way that this doesn't get dropped next week because the other department that's supposed to pick it up never picks it up, right? And we
Right.
see that a lot more. And interestingly enough, this is not just within an organization. This sometimes is a national epidemic. So we actually are dealing with certain projects or proposals that are either done at a national level or is actually done at a multinational level, in which we're kind of in the middle trying to quarterback a multitude of different nations trying to kind of pull together the same type of initiative. And we not only try to find, if you want to call it, the strategic aspect of this is where the jobs is existing and this is what needs to be done, from the standpoint of the outcomes. But we also try to say that, okay, now that the outcomes are out, what are the actual steps that we need to do, and what are the actual to-do lists that we need to do to make sure that those particular outcomes do become resolved and become something that is interesting for all parties. It doesn't matter which country that you're dealing with. So we're kind of in the middle of some interesting discussions right now, to kind of actually have resolve some of those particular issues, and some of the initiatives that they have, which actually have significant funding, and they want to make sure that the funding is actually done appropriately and is actually spent well.
So I think what sticks out to me about that, and what we experience a lot as well, if I'm just thinking about, the ways that I can sort of relate to this is so we do a lot of consulting, and even in the work that we're doing that's less consulting, more implementation, it's almost like, and I use the analogy, I have to be careful with the analogies I use because I quickly get into territory that I don't know what I'm talking about. But those house flipper shows, right, that are on TV, they go into a house and they say, oh, well, this is what we're going to do, right? We're going to buy this house and we're going to renovate the kitchen or whatever, and it's going to be good to go. And then they go into the kitchen or they go into one of the bedrooms and they pull up the carpet and they realize that the entire flooring needs to be replaced, right? Because it caught on fire 100 years ago or something like that. And so and then it's like, well, that changes the entire project. And so I think sounds like what you're describing, and I know we've seen this, is we get in there and we say, hey, look, from the initial analysis, this appears to be the challenge and the jobs that need to be done. So let's get going. And then you get 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes months into that, and then you uncover so many more issues that were actually what you found originally was the symptom of the underlying issue. And now you found the underlying issue. So the challenge that I imagine you deal with and what we deal with is getting to that as quickly as possible. And then, because this is tough, persuading the client that, hey, I know you think that what you described and what you're seeing is the problem, but actually the problem is under there. Am I way off base in assuming you've experienced that too?
Yeah, I'm going to be careful by not writing certain clients out.
Yeah.
There are.
We can edit this out.
Yeah. So part of the challenge, right? There's two challenges in this whole picture, right? One of it is that you do end up dealing with situations in which, obviously because you're talking about a jobs to be done, based approach, and people understand that, hey, these are the priorities. This is what we're going to march, upon. Here's the first couple of priorities that we're going to tackle. Let's do it, right? And then you start going down the line, and then all of a sudden you're meeting and you're talking to people that have not been part of that discussion. They don't know that the priority list already exists. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, what about this? We think this is more important. And trying to get to a level of going through the whole process of this is how we start, and this is the data, and this is the priority list, and what you're talking about is on the bottom of the pile, right? These are the priority lists, and this is the data that we got, from doing surveys, doing interviews, doing a lot of data-driven analysis that provide us so that obviously is a huge educational piece, right? That kind of jumps into the fray. And that's part of the reason why the follow-up 10 weeks, 2 months, 3, 6 months is so crucial and so important, is because it now provides the understanding of how you need to kind of resolve some of those issues that come along the way and trying to implement some of these new products, solutions, whatever the case may be. So that's one area, right? The other area is where you have what I would call the non-streamlined situations, in which you're ready to go, everybody's excited, and all of a sudden you have a very different division that comes in and just swoops in with a totally different project to kind of squash what what you're trying to do, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and that's a totally different political game. Sometimes it has almost nothing to do with, if you want to call it, hey, the job's to be done. Here's the priority list. Here's, it has nothing to do with it. It's just literally now my client, you guys, and us trying to mediate in terms of, this is the understanding. What you guys are trying to do is okay in this particular type of respects, but not in the, confines of trying to resolve the current issue at hand, whether it's product, whether it's talent, whether it's culture, whatever the case may be, right? And usually that now ends up elevating to a higher level within the organization, trying to get them involved and saying that, hey, this is the situation, how do you want to handle it, right? So there's a lot more of that that happens, especially when you go to these higher level engagements where you're dealing it at a national or a multinational level. So I always am on my toes when I have to deal with those particular types of engagements because I know that something or somebody or some organization is going to come out. They're going to have somewhat of a reasonable, well thought out reason why they think they take priority over a particular issue that is current at hand, and trying to make sure that we have enough data to support the reason that
Mhm.
they need to wait a little bit or they're next in line after we do something that is more pressing from a priority standpoint. So and that's part of the reason why we're not just a simple consulting outlet that just provides them and suggests that this is what they need to do. We kind
Right.
of have to work along with them to make sure that, hey, this is this is what we provide, and you'll understand our value once we kind of go through it. And and I have clients like that, and the nice thing about these particular types of clients, at least from the stability standpoint of Karisma, is that it's not a one project and we have to move on to another project type of a deal.
Right.
There's a
Mhm.
regular cadence in terms of, okay, you guys are coming in once or twice a year for new employee orientation or updated training, whatever the case may be, or they put us on retainer because they know that this is not going to be a simple, oh, this
Yeah.
is a 3 month deal, done. It just doesn't work that way,
Right.
right? So, and because we say innovation and growth, we make sure that, hey, you guys are only through the first phase of your growth, right? We're trying to help
Right.
you through the second, third, and fourth phase, which continuously means that we're going to upgrade our capabilities to make sure that we can support you. But also it means that you guys need to understand the level of upgraded needed inward to make sure that that growth is continuously sustainable and robust. So we try to make sure that we kind of have that particular type of business mind with the clients as well as ourselves to make sure that so we would typically walk away from certain engagements. It's like, oh, can't you just come in and make all our salespeople superheroes in 5 days? It's like, I I'm sorry, but you should look into the Bible and see if God was able to do that. It took him 6 days, and he rested on the seventh, right? So if you think that all of a sudden you're going to be able to do something that God was only able to do in six, I just don't think that's possible. So, and that's part of the reason why the follow up mentoring, if you want to call it, engagement, and being able to kind of continuously have touch points on a more longer scale, with a lot of the clients is so important to make sure that a lot of these stick and they actually do see, if you want to call it, the fruits of their labor once they actually
Yeah.
go through the actual process.
Okay, so this is something I'm really curious to get your take on. So I totally hear you. I think that the days of the consultant that comes in and spends, you know, a couple of weeks and just waves their magic wand and moves on. I don't know that that exists anymore, right? I think things are changing too fast, and there's just too much speed that's required in business, which I think increases that change of things, whatever that may be. That by the time those things you recommended are implemented, it's time to address all that stuff again, right? And it brings up new issues. And it makes me think of that. Is it? I think it's the rule of 3 and 10. Are you familiar with this? I think this was by Mikitani. He was the CEO of Rakuten, I think, and his was the rule of 3 and 10. And he said roughly every third and 10th step, or every tripling and 10x, you have to reinvent everything that you're doing. Right. So when you're at 3 people, you have to completely change everything from when you're at 1 people, or 1 person. When you're at 10 people, you have to completely change everything from when you're at 3. And then that carries on. So 30, 100, 300, 1,000, so on and so forth. I think we may be living in the age where that is much, much compressed, right? Where when you throw in that multiplier of AI and the cultural changes and all of those things, you're looking at and what that might look like on a time frame is, depending on the size of your business, every 6 months to 2.5 years, or something like that. You almost have to reinvent everything that you're doing. Now, that doesn't mean you have to completely break it down and start over from scratch, but you are going to have to at least evaluate and optimize and update almost everything that you're doing. And so, as a consultant doing what you do, I think that bakes in a need for your support for a long term,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
as soon as those things get implemented, especially if you're in a fast growth situation, right? We do deal with a lot of, especially funded startups, where they're going to do that 3 to 10 jump, or 30 to 100 jump in 9 months,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes faster.
Yeah.
And so I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Again, if I'm way off base, tell me I'm wrong, but it seems like that's the world that we're living in now.
Yeah. No, I can't agree with you more. Obviously, because of the work that I do work with certain startups that are in the AI space.
Yep.
And there are certain companies that are on such a trajectory, mostly because of hype, mostly because of actual potential in the market, that it's very hard for not only them to keep up with the speed, because one, for instance, they already received funding, they're supposed to make a particular product and it's supposed to go out the door, but because things are moving so fast, they're at that trajectory where it's not just focusing on being able to make the solution. They already are talking to people for their next round of funding. So their entire day just is absolutely booked with, admired with, additional capital coming in, talking to them, seeing when the next round is going to be open, jumping valuations that are just totally Looney Tunes in terms of, how they actually do the actual corporate valuation of these companies. And because of that, you are seeing some very accelerated movements, if I would say, in those particular situations. And you do deal with a lot of these companies in where the 3 and 10 is almost it's almost like it's too late, right? Because you're at a situation where either timeline wise or employee wise, it just doesn't follow along the rules anymore because things are moving so fast in certain industries and certain markets. But going back to the point of, because of the fact that people are growing so fast and because they have to continuously look into their market, their customers, their internal processes, their internal product mix, we have the view that for continuous growth, for them to sustain that growth, for them to actually last, not just through the startup phases, but after they go IPO, they become 1,000 employee organization. They, now become a global organization, not just here in the US or not just in Korea or not just in Southeast Asia, right? When you're thinking about, just growth internally, growth regionally, growth internationally, there's so many aspects that you have to deal with. And as long as Karisma can kind of provide some of those answers and some of those pathways to make sure that they can continuously grow, and we kind of serve in the middle to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that those pathways are, one, legitimate, two, robust and sustainable, and three, done in a way that allows them to actually scale appropriately. That's where, we find ourselves, being a lot more useful to people, which is a little different than, some of these other models that you see from what I would probably say that are more traditional consulting outlets. But having said that, these traditional consulting outlets are no dummies either, right? So
Mhm.
they're going to come to a point of understanding that the models that they've been using to run their business up to this point may go obsolete, and they're going to probably pivot in the upcoming years. And it'll be interesting to see how they pivot, and in what way do they find themselves now useful to continuously gain, if you want to call it, the big check sizes, that they actually have enjoyed uh, over the years. And we'll kind of have to monitor to see how that actually changes some of the way that they actually operate their businesses going forward.
Gene, I think this is going to be super fun to keep getting to talk about. I hope we'll get a chance to kind of follow up on this soon, because I am really curious about what that pace of change and how that impacts. And I bet you if I talked to you 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, you'd probably be saying today that, hey, the last time we talked, it's sped up, it's changed so much since then, right? Like we're covering totally new problems. This has been a really great conversation about this. I feel like I could continue talking about this for a long time. I want to be sensitive of your time. But where can people who are listening and may have said like, hey, this is us, right? Like this is, you're describing what we're dealing with. How can they get in touch with you or learn more about you, or, read some of your guys' content or see what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so quite honestly, we don't actually market ourselves that much because a lot of our discussion points and a lot of the people that we tend to work with is through word of mouth. So going through and doing a podcast with you guys obviously will help. The way that we typically find ourselves, talking to people is that, hey, I saw you on the podcast, or hey, such and such
Mhm.
told me that we need to talk to you. And when that happens, it's usually either through email. We do have a contact us button on our website, www.charisma with a K -ips.com. So if you go to the website, you should be able to read a little bit more about how we conduct our business, who we are. And if you press the contact us button, then I should be able to get an email, or somebody on our team will be able to get an email, and we can start talking afterwards.
Perfect. Well, and folks, if you're watching this, I'm going to have those links in the YouTube description if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're seeing this on, if you're seeing a clip of this on LinkedIn and you really want to reach out to Gene, just drop a comment or send me a direct message. I'll make sure I connect you guys, because I think that, what you do is really important, Gene. I think somebody able to come in with an outsider's perspective and a framework for solving these kinds of problems like you guys have are going to be even more critical as we get, just blasted off into the future with all the innovation that's happening and all the cultural change and all of the, just corporate challenges that businesses are dealing with at all levels. I'm glad to have you, kind of in our network, if you will, to be able to connect with people. So thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today. Folks, if you are watching on YouTube, please do hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us to get more interviews just like this with really awesome professionals like Gene. I appreciate y'all for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks.